All right, what up YouTube? Welcome to TMC Fishing. Today's video, I wanted to do something a little bit different. I wanted to go more on the teaching side of things today, so I was really feeling like being informational. So today, like the video or like the title says, is about pre-spawn. So just like every other critter out there, it's springtime. We're shooting this late February. It's about to be March, but it's springtime pretty much. And just like everything else, the bass are wanting to breed, and in their case, that's called the spawn. So we're getting really close to the spawn, but right now we're in the pre-spawn. So when bass spawn, they move up into very shallow water, anywhere from like a foot to like 10 foot, depending on the clarity, but generally really shallow. They move up into the back of coves, anywhere that you can find shallow water that has hard bottom. So by hard bottom, I mean not silt, not mud. It has to be like gravel or rocks or stumps. I've even seen fish spawn on tires. What they do is they clear out an area with their tail. They kind of brush up and clean it up, make a nice pretty circle, and then they lay their eggs in the middle and they protect the eggs until they hatch. And they'll guard the fry for a little while until they get big enough, a little bigger, and then they'll ditch them. But we're almost there. So the pre-spawn is exactly what it says. It's pre, so it's before. So right now the fish are going to be staging to come up and spawn. In most of the larger lakes right now, Roosevelt, Apache, all those lakes, the water temp hasn't gotten quite high enough. So we need the water temp to be about 60-ish degrees before the fish start spawning. And the moon has a lot to do with it too, the moon cycles, but really temperature is the most important thing. But we're almost there. We're climbing into the 50s now. So we're just waiting. But pre-spawn is a phenomenal time to go fishing. And honestly, the month of February is probably one of my favorite months by far to go fishing. February, March is like, it's like opening day for deer hunts, right? It's super exciting time of year because catching a fish right now, especially if you catch a big female, she's full of eggs because she's starting to get ready to produce these eggs. And so they come up and they're starting to push them into shells, and they actually sun themselves because those eggs have to remain a certain temperature, and they're cold-blooded, so they actually have to sun and keep their core temp up to keep those eggs from dying. But right now they're full of eggs, and they've been eating and bulking up since like October, November. So this is the fattest and the most weight you're ever going to see on a fish. So if you're trying to chase a big bass, now's the time to go fishing. And the bite's just getting really hot really quick right now. This year we haven't gotten any water. It was a really tame winter. So this is honestly a little earlier, I guess, than most of the years in the past because the winter, but we basically didn't have a winter this year. So, which helps in some aspects and hurts in others. For the short term, it helps a lot in terms of it's going to be a really good bass season. It's going to be a great spring because the water level's not fluctuating and the clarity is going to be pretty good on most of the lakes. It really sucks for the ponds because they need water before they're going to go dry. None of the lakes are really in threatened with being dry. They're all 60 to 50% right now. So it's not the biggest deal if they don't get too much water this year, but the ponds are hurting. So it's kind of give and take. But when it comes to finding bass during the pre-spawn time, right? They're going to be getting ready to move into the spawn zones. So big flats of shallow water, or like I said, the very back of coves. So you're going to be, if you want to find fish, you're going to be looking somewhere close to that. So identify areas where you think fish would spawn and then back up just a little bit. Whether that be a secondary point, like a point in the middle of a cove that they can hold up on that's close to some deep water that they're waiting to move up, or a big brush pile, some trees, a big laydown, something like that will hold fish that are getting ready to spawn because they haven't quite moved up yet. They want to be deep water adjacent but they don't want to move up into the shallows yet. Okay, fully commit to moving up into the shallows. So keep that in mind whenever you're walking, whether it be a pond. Really pay attention to your deep side, like wherever you have a dam. Pay attention to where the deep water from the dam breaks and you start getting into the shallow water right on that break zone. Especially if the water's clear, you'll see where it falls off into the blue or green water. As soon as you can't see, that's a great spot to start in that zone. But name of the game right now is cover water, especially at the lakes. If you're at a small pond, you can't, and there's not a whole lot to hit. We'll talk about that a little bit more about slowing down and finessing. But if you're at a lake or a big pond, cover as much water as you can. The fish are going to be grouped up right now, not schooled up in giant schools. They're going to be in little, what we call wolf packs. Excuse me. Wolf packs can have anywhere from like 4 to like 20 fish probably. And they're just kind of grouped up, cruising the banks, looking for forage. They're still trying to fatten up because during the spawn, they don't eat it all. Okay. So they lose a ton of weight. So they got to bulk up for it. So they're cruising the bank looking for forage, or out deep, they're looking for shad or anything like that. So generally, once you find fish, there's going to be more than one. Okay. The last time we went out, I think me and my dad went out together. We doubled up 3 times. By as soon as one of us hooked up, the other one threw right in there and got hooked up immediately. So generally, when you get a bite, that was just the first fish that got on top of your lure, and the other ones were coming. So as soon as you find fish, keep making that same cast, especially if you're by yourself. Make that same cast 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 times. Make that same cast until those fish have either moved on or you've sore lipped them all and they don't want to do it. And then once you messed up, once that group's over, you keep covering water and go to the next one. I don't give any spot more than, I would say, 20, 30 minutes tops if the bite's tough. I'm not going to sit in the same area for very long. Okay. There is no point in beating a spot to death right now just because you've caught fish in the past or what have you. If they're not there, they're not going to bite. This time of year, they're hungry, they're aggressive. If they're there, you can probably convince 1 or 2 of them to bite to know they're there. Okay. So just cover as much water as you can. So in terms of covering water, I'm going to show you some baits that really coincide with covering water and then when to slow down. So the first bait that has been a killer for me, okay, is the spinner bait. Okay. Spinner baits are phenomenal search baits, okay, for finding fish. And they really seem to trigger big fish too. Really seem to like them. It's kind of a louder presentation. It's not super subtle. So it sometimes takes a more aggressive or larger fish to commit to it. Not to say that you can't catch a bunch of dinks on it, but generally I seem to catch bigger and better quality fish on spinnerbait. Now there's some conditions to throwing a spinnerbait too. Ideally, okay, you want one of 2 things, if not both. You want either wind or you want murky water. Okay. This bait does not do well on slick calm days in crystal clear water because as it's made to imitate a bait fish, but it doesn't quite look like a bait fish, right? In super clear water, they'll take a look at it and they're kind of debating it. So you want either wind disturbing the water and blurring up that presentation, or you want cloudy water so they can't see it and they're relying off of noise. This is a willow leaf because it looks like or willow blade because it looks like a willow leaf. I prefer them. I vastly prefer willow over the other types of blades. You have Colorados that look like circles and they make a thumping noise through the water. It's a deep thump and you'll feel it in your rod versus the willows. It's a lot lighter, but from my experience, it works better for most situations. Okay. Colors, I'm going to be throwing a lot of white because I'm trying to imitate bait fish, shad, or like a bluegill color, a green, purple, something like that. If I'm in super stained water, like mud, I'm going to throw either a chartreuse or I'm going to throw a black and blue. Okay. But you really want either, like I said, the wind and or murky water. But this thing, it comes through cover, sticks, brush, all that stuff really, really well because the hook is in line with this wire guide and it keeps it from coming through or keeps it from getting hung up on a lot of things. Really nice. Now, if I'm fishing, if the conditions are not good for this, okay, I'm going to switch up. Say we're fishing relatively clear water and flat calm, bluebird skies, stuff like that. I'm going to throw a paddle tail swim bait. Okay. Super simple, nothing crazy. You can buy them pre-rigged. Barkley makes some really good ones that you can buy in like Walmart or wherever, honestly, wherever. They're all over the place. Just they've got a hook that comes out the top. They're super simple. I mean, they're such a good search bait, cover water bait, because they're so simple. You just throw them out there, reel them back in. Nothing crazy. You play with the depths. And, you know, I prefer to let it sink all the way to the bottom. Personally, I have a lot better luck with that, letting it sink to the bottom, hopping it off the bottom, and then bringing it back to me. Now, you reel these pretty slow. Okay, you can fish them on a spinning reel or you can fish them on a bait caster. Doesn't really matter. But you want to bring them back to you just fast enough to get that boot tail moving. Okay, you don't want to be burning this through the water. You want it just kind of lumbering around, looking like an injured bait fish. I rigged this one weedless because I like throwing into brush and structure. But that all depends on the body of water you're fishing. If you're fishing open body of water, there's not a lot of brush, there's not a lot of moss or weeds or anything, throw an exposed hook. Your hookup ratio is going to be way better. If you're fishing super brushy stuff, throw it weedless. The other thing that I added to this one is a blade underneath. Now, this is whenever I'm throwing in somewhat murky water or there's a little bit of wind. I like to add a little flash. And also, if I'm throwing, say I find a big school of shad, I want my bait to stand out amongst a million shad. To make it stand out, that blade really does help. So it says, hey, come get me. Lets them single you out a little bit better. But I kind of use it as a tier system. Is I'm going to throw, you know, like I said earlier, I'm going to throw on super calm days, slick calm, clear water. I'm going to throw just a swim bait. Okay, just little boot tail, a little bit of wind, a little bit of murk. I'm going to add some flash. A lot of wind, a lot of murk. I'm going to throw a spinner bait. I'm going to make some noise. Okay, that's kind of how I tier it in my head. And then you can play, not to say that a spinner bait won't work on a flat calm day. Really gauge it off the way the bass are letting you know what they want. You know, they'll let you know. And then my next search bait would be a crankbait. Okay, springtime, fall, winter, and spring crankbaits are the ticket. I have so much confidence in a lipless crank. I've probably caught more fish this fall and winter on a lipless crank than anything. Not doing anything fancy, really just casting it out there, letting it sink to the bottom, and just giving it a slow, steady reel back to me has produced a ton of bites. Now, this is what's called a lipless crank because it doesn't have a bill. Okay, it gets all the action from the flat head here. That's what creates the, the water current hits it and creates the wobble. Now, if you're pond hopping or if you're kind of limited on space or tackle, I always recommend grab a lipless because they're kind of the Swiss Army knives of crankbaits. Okay, this sinks. Unlike every other crankbait, a lipless will sink. Okay, so I control the depth purely by how quick I engage my reel. If I want this to run shallow, the second it hits the water, I'm reeling. Okay. If I want to run it deep, I'm going to let it sink all the way to the bottom and then I'm going to reel. So I don't have to interchange baits depending on the depth I'm fishing. I just change the way I reel it. You can also yo-yo them. That's a little bit more advanced technique, but honestly, just cast them out there, reel them back in, nothing fancy. Okay. Now, this is the 6 Sense Quake. This is like a 10, I think it's almost a $12 crankbait. Okay, this is a fairly expensive crankbait. To tell you the truth, if I'm pond hopping, I'm not going to throw that bait. Especially if I'm from the bank and I know I'm not going to be able to get to it. I'm not going to throw that expensive of a bait. I'm a budget guy, so I like to throw budget baits, especially from the bank. So don't think that you got to go out and buy the best lures out there, the super expensive, the crazy lures. By no means, especially if you're just getting into it, buy the cheap stuff. Don't be afraid to throw it, especially if you're learning. Okay. This right here is a lipless I got at Walmart. They have like a bottom tray. Okay. They're dollar baits. You've got like little crankbaits. You've got some spinner baits in there. You've got some buzz baits and stuff. They're like all buck. Okay. This was in that pack and I bought it specifically for pond hopping. If I break it off and lose it, oh well. Okay. Doesn't really hurt that bad. Whereas if I lose that one, hurts a lot. Okay. One thing I will say, and this is just purely my advice, okay? If you're going to buy the cheap lures, which I do recommend buying them, they still catch fish, don't get me wrong, at all. Price does not equal fish in the slightest. Upgrade your hooks, okay? So these red hooks are razor sharps. Also at Walmart, they're literally like across the aisle. You look, buy you a nice pack of treble hooks in a couple different sizes, okay, to replace the ones on the baits. This bait comes with like, they look like brass or copper hooks basically, and out of the package they're really sharp, so they kind of give you the illusion that they're good quality, but they get dull incredibly fast. So after like 2 or 3 fish, they're going to be really dull, and you're going to tend to lose a lot of fish. So once you buy a pack of treble hooks, they go a long ways. You don't use them all that often. I don't replace hooks a ton. So, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's a couple cents a piece for these once you buy a pack, and they will save you a lot of heartache and heartbreak in the future from losing fish. Your hookup ratio will be a little bit better, just having better quality hooks. But like I said, totally preference. I just recommend it. The other thing, okay, with cranks, like I said, I really enjoy throwing a lipless, but if I'm going to be out on the boat and I have access to some deeper water, throwing a medium diving crank and or a square bill, if I'm fishing like 4 to 5 foot, is going to be the ticket this time of year. They are absolute killers. They dive down and this bill digs into the water with the resistance and starts bouncing and deflecting off all of the rocks and brush and stuff down there on the bottom, and it really triggers fish. Another way you can fish it than just running it back to you is we call it speed cranking. So when you're speed cranking, you're trying to force a bite. You can do this when the fish are really lethargic and not really wanting to bite, is you burn it really quick back to you and then stop it. So you burn, 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 pause, burn, 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 pause. And what that does is running across the bottom of the water column, the fish sees it go past them and it's just kind of screaming the whole way because they've got rattles in them. They make a lot of noise. So it's just rah, all the way past them. And it's kind of like a cat. They can't help but jump out and hit it. Even if it's just a reactionary strike, it's not a food response. As long as they reach out and slap at it, these treble hooks will catch them. Okay, so you're just trying to trigger that reaction button. So that's a good way to catch fish that don't really want to eat yet. But if you are on some feeding fish, they're going to absolutely smack the crap out of it. And it is such a fun bite. So cranking is going to be phenomenal this time of year. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is slowing down just a little bit. Okay. So once I find fish, okay, and or if the fish are a little lethargic on me, I'm going to throw a jerkbait. Okay. This is the Guggen Scout Junior. This is kind of a smaller profile jerkbait. If I'm fishing the lake, I'll upsize, but if I'm pond hopping, this is a perfect size. Jerk baits, you can throw 365 days a year, and I promise I'll catch fish. They're such a consistent bait. I've got one tied on every time I hit the water. They're such a good fallback bait. The only downside to them to me is your wrist gets tired after a while from throwing them, but if I'm catching fish, who cares? But what I've had the most success with this time of year is once I locate bass with either the spinner bait or the crankbaits or whatever, once I locate some fish, I'm going to stop and I'm going to keep making that cast. Like I said, 5, 6, 7 times. Mm-hmm. And when the fish stop biting right there, I'm going to throw a jerkbait in and I'm going to try and get a couple of spare fish, out of that group that otherwise probably wouldn't bite again. And you can kind of trick them. And so whenever you're fishing jerkbait, you're just going to cast out there. You're going to reel a couple times, and its bill is just going to dive it down to the correct depth. This one only fishes 3 to 5 foot, so it's just going to get down there, and you're going to pop it. Okay. Pop, pop, pause, pop, pop, pop. Let the fish tell you how aggressive they want to be, and I honestly lean more towards being more aggressive versus less aggressive to try and trigger that feed response. But such a phenomenal bait. Always works. I like a little bit of wind. I prefer a little bit of wind whenever I'm throwing this, but you don't have to have it. Color-wise, I'm going to be throwing a translucent color in clear water and a solid color in dark brackish water. One thing I would like to add about the spring, okay, so from January till probably the end of March, for some weird reason, okay, red is such a crazy color this time of year, whether it be crankbaits, spinner baits, paddle tails, creature baits, whatever I'm throwing, try and sneak a little bit of red in there if you can. Something about it this time of year, they just hate it. I've heard a couple different theories that they're really keying into crawfish this time of year, and the crawfish really like to eat their eggs, so it's a food and a defensive thing, but I'm not really sure what it is. But I've had a ton of luck throwing red baits. Really since January, I've been throwing like red blade baits and been having a lot of success with it. So keep that in mind. My new favorite color is California Craw. It's like a green pumpkin belly with a black and red back, and it seems to work regardless of the color of the water, of the clarity. Okay. So the final bait I want to talk about really has to do with that water temperature, like I was talking about earlier, and that is topwater. Okay, whether that be, my personal favorite is a popper style bait. I love it on topwater. You can throw a topwater frog or something like that too. But this time of year is almost great topwater season. Once they're on bed, once we're like full spawn into post spawn, best time of the year to throw topwater. But we're starting to get into there, and really the water temperature will tell you if you can throw one or not. For some weird reason, 55 degrees and greater seems to be the threshold. It's like if you can find 55-degree water, you can catch them on topwater. So I always keep that in mind. I know a couple guys that when they're pond hopping and they're bank fishing, they bring a little thermometer with them to check the water, just to double check. If you don't have any electronics on your boat, buy one. They're super cheap. But for some weird reason, 55 seems to be that magical number. Anything above that, you can start catching fish on topwater. And for that, I'm really paying attention to activity more than anything. If I see bass busting bait, I'm for sure throwing a topwater. If I start to see fish chasing dragonflies, or if I'm seeing any kind of activity on the surface, that's keying me in. So I'm going to try it. Okay. Are you going to 100% catch fish on them yet? No, but the possibilities there. And I promise topwater is the funnest bite there is in bass fishing. You just can't beat it. It's so much fun. So if you can catch them on it, try it. But that's pretty much it for lures. Like I was talking about, I guess this is the time of year. So if you've been wanting to get into bass fishing, if you've been, you haven't gone out in a long time, this is the time to potentially catch a PB and or get somebody started into it. It's such a fun activity. It's great for the kids. It's great for adults. It's my ultimate like therapy. Gets all the stress out of me, whether it be from work or home life or anything. It's, for me, it's an obsession, but for most people, it's a great hobby. I highly recommend it. If you have any questions about, lures or setup, rods and reels or techniques or anything like that, drop them down in the comments. If you're local and you want to maybe hit the pond together or something and have me show you anything, I'm super down. If I got the time, just let me know. I'm going to be hitting the lakes pretty hard here now that spring's coming in. Not so much pond hopping, but I'm going to try and pump out some videos for you guys. So like always, I appreciate you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.